A flooded townhome in Washington state leads authorities to making a gruesome discovery.
One can never imagine what an individual goes through. I start to think also about her family and what they're feeling, knowing what she went through at the last moments of her life.
The case would unearth more clues that would ultimately lead to a killer's arrest. In early August, a person who lived in a Lake City, Washington townhouse called their landlord believing a faucet was left on in a bathroom which flooded the unit. The neighbor said 2 to 3 inches of water covered the floors, part of the ceiling collapsed, and the power went out. When the landlord accessed the unit from the roof, the horrific discovery was made. A young woman was found lifeless in the bathroom on her back with what looked like injuries to her neck. And her body was positioned in an unusual way, as if her legs had been posed with her feet together and her knees were out. Seattle police worked the investigation as a homicide and reportedly spent hours combing through the unit for more clues. One of those clues would be a home security video showing a man entering his home carrying groceries with a young woman. Then the man was seen leaving alone while taking something out from under his shirt. Authorities say the man seen leaving his townhome was 25-year-old Andy Chu. After he left his townhome, he reportedly went to a local hospital. On August 11th, police received a report of a patient at the University of Washington Medical Center who allegedly groped a nurse's breast and tried to pull her head down by hooking the back of her neck. That patient was Chu, who had been taken to the hospital by his friends for erratic and psychotic behavior. He would ultimately be arrested by police there, and his arrest report would reveal more horrific details. The victim was identified as someone close to Chu, his girlfriend, 25-year-old Zoey Suyun He. Zoey, who reportedly lives in Hawaii, was visiting Chu ahead of her birthday. When authorities discovered Zoey's body, she was posed in a butterfly position with her throat cut. Chu would tell police he thought he may have killed his girlfriend. He allegedly told police he had a memory of choking, twisting her neck, and holding her underwater. As he said, he thought he broke her neck and remembered her bleeding from her nose. According to prosecutors, Zoey was found on her back covered in blood with an ice pack on her throat and a small block behind her neck which supported her head. With a seemingly hazy memory of the gruesome murder, Chu told police he remembered taking Zoey's body out of the bathtub and placing her on the floor. According to the arrest affidavit, Chu tried to revive his girlfriend by sprinkling acai powder all over her body and placing a golf ball-like object into her mouth to fix her jaw, then reportedly tried CPR. Police questioned why Chu attacked and assaulted his girlfriend, and he allegedly said he was unclear, but added she was acting weird and attacked him. Investigators say he wouldn't or couldn't describe the attack and denied they were arguing at the time of the murder. But police noted he had bruises and abrasions on his knuckles, knees, legs, and elbows. Chu admitted to police that he had taken MDMA or Molly and smoked marijuana with Zoey. A medical examiner did confirm Zoey's cause of death to be asphyxia by homicide. We have a lot to break down in this case, and joining me to discuss it further is Law and Crime legal analyst Julie Rendelman. Now, Julie, I think we both can agree this case is absolutely horrific, but one thing was just the gruesome nature in which the victim died: throat cut, choking, twisting her neck, holding her underwater. What do you make of all of that?
Anytime we talk about these cases, and we talk about them a lot, none of us get immune to the brutality. This one, like many we've talked about, is one of the more brutal ones, and it leaves more questions than there are answers in terms of why it was that an individual who likely never had a prior criminal record would have committed such a horrific crime on someone that he purported to love.
And Andy Chu, the defendant in this case, told authorities he had taken MDMA and smoked marijuana. How much of the drug use do you think actually may have played a part in Andy Chu allegedly committing this crime, given he even placed a golf ball like object in her mouth and even sprinkled acai powder all over her?
So, we hear about people taking MDMA all the time, and we certainly don't hear about it resulting in a brutal murder of another individual. And so I think there's questions to be asked as to whether or not MDMA or how much MDMA and the drugs played a role. And I think one of the questions that authorities and his own attorneys are going to want to know and ask is, what was his mental state outside of the drugs? Is this an individual that had mental health issues irregardless of the drugs he was taking? Because it is a leap to argue that just because an individual was on MDMA or any of the drugs we've heard many people take, that it would result in such a brutal action on his part.
And what stuck out to me is we do see a lot of domestic violence cases and we cover them here at Law and Crime. But watching that surveillance video of Andy Chu and Zoe, that they were walking into his townhome with a bag of groceries, only for Chu to leave the home alone as Zoe was left dead in his apartment. What are your thoughts on kind of those chilling images of the ring camera video showing them just kind of going into their apartment, let lo and behold, the tragedy that would happen after?
Well, I mean, if you accept what he says that something occurred inside of the home that promulgated these events, and he does have injuries that are consistent with some type of struggle between himself and the woman he eventually killed. And so, it's troubling because, well, first of all, for the prosecutors, thankfully they have that footage because it establishes that he's the last person that saw her alive. And it also indicates there's nobody else going in or out of that home. And so it rules out any other potential suspects. I think what's eerie about it is they seem to just be walking in with groceries quite nonchalantly. And it's only when he leaves the home, and it's not until neighbors notice, I believe, the water running, that authorities get to the location and find her dead in the apartment.
And going back to kind of just the horrific nature of the murder, do you think that the two may have had previous domestic violence within their relationship?
I don't know. Usually when we hear about these cases, the first thing we hear about is that there were multiple domestic incidents prior. And we didn't hear that. It doesn't mean it didn't happen, but we haven't heard that. And one of the other things that sticks out is, remember, the reason that he ends up in the hospital, at which time the police eventually get to the hospital to arrest him, is his friends noticed that he wasn't acting like himself. His friends noticed that he was acting quite peculiarly. And in fact, when he goes to the hospital, he allegedly inappropriately touches a nurse. And so I'm guessing that when you hear from friends and family, they're going to say this was not the typical behavior of this young man. And again, we don't know, but that's just my guesstimate as to what we may hear in the future.
And it seems to me that the defense attorneys may kind of have a lot to work with when it comes into this case. What are your thoughts on defense routes that an attorney may try to use to defend their client?
So it's a great question. And you're right, there are a lot of avenues they may explore. One of the avenues potentially is some type of self-defense, although I think they're going to have a little trouble with that because one would have to expect that she acted so violently towards him that it required him to act so violently that he ended up killing her. I think there's many areas the defense will be exploring as to what kind of person he was when he wasn't on the drugs and what kind of person he was when he was on them. Keep in mind also, when someone voluntarily takes drugs or someone voluntarily uses alcohol and gets behind the wheel, it's not a get out of jail free card because you made a decision to use drugs or alcohol and that led you to commit a violent crime. Here, though, it's a bit unusual because that's not what you'd expect from someone that is using MDMA.
And prosecutors set Andy Chu's bail at $5 million. But are you surprised he was even issued bail in this case?
So we talk about this all the time, and I say the same thing. If this was New York City, he would be on remand. There would be no bail. There would be no option for him to get out. With that said, there may be some expectation that $5 million is an amount that he won't be able to afford, or that $5 million, if he's able to afford it, will guarantee his return to court, meaning that he's not going to walk away from that amount of money, which he would lose if he failed to return to court. I always find it shocking, especially in a crime of this magnitude, that an individual is not put on remand as we usually expect in New York.
And kind of going back again to the drug aspect of this case, do you think that it's plausible that maybe Andy Chu just allegedly had a psychotic break, and that because even reading kind of through the arrest report, et cetera, how he was saying that he didn't know if he had killed someone, he thought he killed someone. What do you kind of make of those statements that he made to police, and how that kind of ties into the drugs that he allegedly was using? Before he committed this crime.
Sure. I think, look, in a sense, the fact that he was brought to the hospital may be a positive thing for the prosecution and or the defense because they may do blood work, and that may help determine what, if anything, was in his system. Keep in mind, Elizabeth, if there's no drugs in his system, then he doesn't have an argument that he was on MDMA at the time he committed this heinous crime. And so I think that the statements he made are similar to the type of crime that he committed, quite peculiar. Some of the behavior on top of the murder, the idea that he would think that, and one of his statements, I believe, that he put a golf ball size object into her mouth with the hope of helping to get her to survive, which is a rational individual would never do such a thing. And so I think all these things, what the blood work is going to show, if there is blood work, are going to be quite telling as to the direction the prosecution goes and as to the direction the defense goes.
And I think, I can't emphasize enough just how horrific this case is, like many cases that we cover here. But I kind of, when reading through this, going back to how the victim may have felt in her final moments, where maybe, we don't know or not, was she participating in drug use as well, too? Not that that warrants anything, but like just in her final moments where she flew from Hawaii to Seattle to be with her boyfriend and then never makes it back home. She ends up dead, lifeless, and in such a gruesome and horrific manner. What are your thoughts about the victim's final moments in this case, given the fact that she died just so gruesomely?
One can never imagine what an individual goes through. I start to think also about her family, and what they're feeling, knowing what she went through at the last moments of her life. And yeah, again, there's going to be an autopsy. That autopsy is going to tell investigators whether or not she was on drugs, how much drugs she was on, if there was alcohol involved at all. But it's hard to fathom a scenario of not thinking about what a victim would have felt like at the moments as they see their life slipping away. And it kind of goes back to the defendant and the defendant's, the brutality of his actions, of the lack of compassion, and the complete and utter brutality of taking someone's life under the conditions that he did.
All right, Julie Rendelman, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time to discuss this case with me today. Andy Chu was charged with first-degree murder in the death of Zoey Suyun He. He was also charged with first-degree assault for assaulting the nurse. He's still behind bars on a $5 million bond, and his next scheduled court date is slated for August 28th. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.